Africa, a continent of contrast where opulence and poverty live side by side. It's historically known for civil wars, famine, poverty, and corruption. It's known more for its dark past than its bright future. On May 25, 1963, the Organization of African Unity was formed. They focused on poverty reduction, healthcare, and education as a way of improving their colonial past. It started with 32 countries, including Tanzania, and grew to include Malawi and Mauritius. This is an examination of how the OAU Charter affected the journey of these three countries. Pre-independent African countries were grouped into a loose association based on the ancestry of the colonial powers, which included the French, Italian, and British. While still part of Africa, they all maintained strong ties with their colonial powers and were still being influenced politically and economically. This was a smart move designed to benefit the economies of the colonial powers pre- and post-independence. The economy of Africa in this period was heavily dependent on exporting raw materials to the European colonial countries. Education in Africa was mostly liberal arts related to service to colonial administrators. More than 80% of Africa was engaged in poor subsistence farming with very little ownership of commercial agriculture. Healthcare was basic and focused on the cure of common tropical diseases such as malaria, typhoid, and cholera. However, there was a strong Pan-African movement made up of young Africans who had just returned from university education in Europe. These young leaders fought for independence and eventually became the post-colonial rulers of their countries. They included Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana and Julius Nyerere of Tanzania. To strengthen their independence and break away from their colonial past and dominance, these men, along with Africa's other new leaders, formed the OAU in 1963. It had become the continent's opportunity to redefine itself. Their priorities included improving the quality and diversity of education, which had been seriously lacking under colonialism, improving healthcare, and reducing poverty. One such country that demonstrated the early visions of the OAU was Mauritius. It's located in the Indian Ocean off the coast of Madagascar and gained independence from the British in 1968. The country's economy was 95% dependent on sugarcane. Frequent cyclones which destroyed the sugarcane crops and rapid changes to the world price of sugar made it difficult for the government to pay for its basic services and maintain its economy successfully. As a new member of the OAU in 1968, Prime Minister Rangulama of Mauritius understood the need for good governance, self-reliance away from sugar export dependency, and the need to create a healthy society within the resources of the economy. Between 1975 and 1995, their economy grew to include tourism and offshore financial services. Because of this and good governance by successive prime ministers, the Africa Report of 2012 ranked Mauritius high as one of the most politically stable, economically developed, and advanced countries in Africa. Per capita income has grown from $200 at independence in 1968 to $15,000 by 2011. The objectives of the original OAU goals of 1963 are still very much evident today. President Rakeswa Periaga of Mauritius shared his vision on his path to better his country.
My mission would be, my interest is in education and the eradication of poverty. These are the two things on which I am focusing. And I'm trying to work with all the people who are involved in these two sectors so that we can move forward in our economic development.
Another country that has shown success since the beginning of the OAU is Tanzania. It gained independence from the British in 1961. Its first leader, President Julius Nyerere, was nicknamed the teacher because of his devotion to educating his people. As one of the founding members of the OAU, he had a philosophy of economic self-reliance, reducing poverty, good governance, and basic healthcare for all. These became the basic foundations for each country member of the OAU. However, Tanzania's successes were more seen in the areas of education and healthcare than they were for economic development. It had the highest literacy rate in Africa by the 1980s, but was borrowing a lot of money to grow its economy. By 1985, it was spending more than $170 million each year to service its debt. In the 1990s, many poorer African countries, including Tanzania, began asking for debt relief from the World Bank and the IMF. They argued that money saved from paying their debt would be used to improve the lives of their people. Following this, in 2000, all 193 members of the United Nations, including the 53 member countries of the OAU, signed the Millennium Development Goals. Some of these objectives mirror the original OAU goals of poverty eradication, improved education, and healthcare development. I spoke with the current president of Tanzania about his country's progress in line with the OAU and now UN goals.
We are making successes, because now with primary education we are at 97% enrollment, which is quite a big success. Because in the UN, universal primary education by 2015 you should get 100%. We've scaled up healthcare. In malaria, death from malaria has been cut by over half now. We have been making interventions with regards to building capacities for open heart surgery, cancer treatment, neurosurgical.
Malawi's history of total dictatorship after independence, economic growth, and then sudden near economic collapse is a stark difference from Tanzania and Mauritius. In 1970, President Kamazo Banda of Malawi declared himself president for life, and by 1993, foreign aid from the international community had stopped due to mismanagement and corruption. Healthcare and basic education suffered while the wealthy few sent their children to schools overseas. A forced referendum on President Banda saw power eventually transfer in 1994 to President Muluzi. However, in a bid to hang on to power, President Muluzi attempted to change the constitution, allowing him to run for a third term. This was unsuccessful. His successor in 2004 was President Mutharika, whose presidency was eventually marred by deadly protests within the country due to increasing poverty, acute shortages of fuel, no electricity, and excessive spending by the president. He had acquired a private jet and a fleet of luxury vehicles for the government, while his country slipped into economic hardship. For a time, it seemed the 1963 goals and vision of the OAU had completely escaped Malawi. Yet another referendum was called in 2012 due to rising pressure, but then President Mutharika died from a heart attack and Vice President Joyce Banda became president in April 2012. She refocused the country's priorities and began policies to attract foreign investors. Aid returned and she began to focus on what was the original vision of the OAU's 1963 goals of improving healthcare by receiving the donation of hospital equipment from a private U.S. group, eradication of poverty with the reopening of factories, and improved education with the new ability of the government to pay for its teachers. She then did the unthinkable as an African leader, slashing her salary by 30% and made more sacrifices, as she explained to me.
Yeah, it's a turning point because the decision for me to get rid of the presidential jet was made by me, but jointly with the cabinet of Malawi. It is not a luxury to have a plane in Malawi, because for me to go to Tanzania it takes me 2 days. To go to Mozambique it takes me 2 days because I have to go to South Africa. Even to Zambia it takes me 2 days. But all those countries you can fly in a private jet in 1 hour. But I decided that I was still going to sell it and make the sacrifice, because right now Malawi is passing through very difficult economic hardships.
On July 9, 2002, the OAU changed its name to the African Union. Its 1963 mission, however, remained the same, allowing countries to stay accountable to its most basic goals. While some have debated the effectiveness of the OAU in meeting all of its set-out objectives, the ability of its members to collectively negotiate for debt relief grew into the Millennium Development Goals. This allowed more focus on the original OAU charter of eradicating poverty, improving healthcare, and universal education. As the African Union, as it is now called, marks its 50th anniversary on May 25, 2013, we are reminded of the words of one of its 1963 founding members: "We face neither east nor west, we face forward."